Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome to my channel, and look who's here.
Hi, it's Ros of Scallydandling about the books, and really thrilled to be back talking about a book with Shawn again.
And we are going to talk about one of the Booker books that has really captured our imaginations, and that is the Booker shortlisted book, A Passage North by Anuk Arudpragasam. Was on the long list, now on the short list. We have both read it, and we were hoping to have Kim of Middle of the Book March with us today, but she is indisposed, and we are sending a lot of love, and I'm sending big gay hugs, and I don't know what kind of hugs Roz is sending for her to get better, but we are missing her.
Rather formal English hugs, maybe, perhaps I'll shake her hand.
Stiff upper lip hugs or something.
Yep. That's it.
She didn't actually like this book as well as I think Ros and I did. I absolutely loved it. And how would you characterize your reaction?
This was an exceptional book for me.
That's what I thought. I saw your Goodreads star rating. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what it's all about and why you liked it? To get us started, Ross.
Well, I think it's interesting that this book that we've both read is another book about the trauma generated by civil war, because that's kind of the key to the book, as it were. So the author is Sri Lankan of Tamil origin, and I'm sure people watching this will be aware that there was an extremely bitter and brutal and tragic civil war in Sri Lanka that ended in 2009, with one side, the Tamils, being
massacred,
roundly defeated and massacred, and it's a deeply unhappy history, and that pervades this story. Although it's not set during the war, it's very much about aftermath. And one individual young man who grew up away from the conflict but has chose to come back and work in the sort of restoration and recovery from it.
That is a good way to get started. And his name is, I'm terrible with names. I finished reading this about two and a half weeks ago. Krishan. And he lives in Colombo, which is not the Tamil area. And that's where he grew up, but his family goes back to the north where the Civil War had been, but had left by the time of the war, is my understanding.
And that there has been a huge Tamil diaspora before and after the war.
That's
around that most, like about half the Sri Lankan Tamils now live outside Sri Lanka.
That's right.
Spread around the world. Yeah.
And he lives in Colombo with his elderly grandmother and with his mother. His father was killed in a terrorist attack in Colombo that was a real life event. I forget what year that was. And his grandmother is failing a bit. She's maybe close to 90 or something, but she's a big presence in the family. And she has a caretaker, Rani. And the opening incident of the novel is that Rani, who had gone back to the north, I'll say a little bit more about Rani, because when Krishan was doing working kind of
doing
social work,
recovery work in the north,
in the north a couple of years before, he crossed paths with Rani. She was a outpatient at a psychiatric institution that he was liaising with, and she was severely traumatized because she lost both of her sons in the last few weeks of the war.
Yeah. One just virtually in the last days of the war.
The penultimate day is what I remember.
Yeah.
And she is, obviously, understandably traumatized. And it is her that he ends up hiring to move to Colombo and be a caregiver for his grandmother. So the opening incident of this novel is that she went back to visit her family in the north, and then she didn't come back to Colombo, and few months have gone by, and then he gets a call from her daughter, and she has died. She fell into a well and died in the backyard of the house, I think.
Yeah.
That's the initiating incident. So he goes up north for her funeral. And there isn't a whole bunch more plot in this story, is there?
No, that is the plot, really. That, and that he gets an email from his ex-lover, who he'd had a relationship with when he was living as a student in Delhi. Yeah, and those are the two plot points, as it were. Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about spoilers, because we think, and we are right, that it is impossible to spoil this book. What we have told you, you find out on the inside synopsis, and you find out in the first chapter. There are no chapter breaks, but you find out in the first 20 pages. There isn't much else that happens. There are questions that are activated early in the story, and we're not going to comment on answers to those questions later in the book, but they're really, it's not a plot-driven novel. So we're not going to worry about spoilers, because we don't really think there are any. And if you don't trust us, maybe you shouldn't watch this video until after you've read the book.
Yeah. Well, and I think the bottom line is that if you like the kind of book where there would be lots of spoilers, this is not the book for you to read. So, go away now. Yeah.
That's a good point. Maybe I'd like to talk for a couple minutes about his first novel, 2016, The Story of a Brief Marriage, which I read the year it came out. People on Litzy, which was my main bookish social media at the time, were talking about it. I read it and I loved it. It is set in the dying days of that civil war. A 16-year-old kid, he's been a freedom fighter or whatever. So he's in this camp and he knows that he will die. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but there's no doubt in anybody's mind that they're all going to be massacred. And one of the older men in the camp, who also has the same feeling, asks this 16-year-old, and he's not a kid, he is a man because of what he's lived through. He's much older. You don't think of him as a 16-year-old. And this older man asks him to marry his daughter, who's about the same age, in the camp, so that she will have a taste of marriage before they're all massacred. And the protagonist does marry her, and it's that story. And so it occurs over 24 hours or less. Wow, it's really powerful. And the one thing that I thought about this book, I love the writing, I love the spindly sentences and the meditative tone of it, but I felt that there was quite a bit of it that was overwritten. And I remember saying, I probably wrote it in my Goodreads review, that I was looking forward to seeing what he did next, but that this was a tad overwritten, because I think he has really progressed. Because I would say there was maybe 3 sentences, I thought, and 3 sentences when the sentences are as long as this, but still only about 3 sentences, I thought a little bit overwritten. That really the writing here was just a joy to read.
Yes. And it's really interesting you say that, because I was having the same thought process as I was reading this. I was thinking, when is he going to overdo this? The style is so distinct. It's almost Victorian, I thought, in style. Sentences with multiple subordinate clauses, which is not the fashion in writing now. So it has almost an old-fashioned quality. The ideas aren't old-fashioned at all, but the writing style in a way is. And I kept thinking, is he going to trip up? Is he going to fail? Is this going to start to irritate me? And again, I had exactly the same thought. There were just a couple of moments when I thought, oh no, this one I'd have edited this down a bit, or this is a tiny bit sententious. But I also found myself thinking, where it did get like that it was actually expressing the personality of Krishan.
Exactly.
That is, and you might be irritated by that personality some of the time, but it's actually appropriate to the way he thinks and the kind of person that he is.
Exactly. You nailed it. I would like to show 2 minutes of an interview. We'll see if YouTube lets me. I'm not violating anybody's copyright, but if I can get away with it, I'm going to show 2 minutes of an interview that was done with him. He was interviewed on Zoom by the is she Indian or Indian American novelist Megha Majumdar. This interview was put on by Book Forum, which is part of Art Forum. Put a link to the entire video. I recommend it very highly. But let's just watch a couple of minutes where he talks about the question that he got from the other writer was about the depth of his attention And I'm not going to play the part where he kind of is modestly poo-poos that and saying there's a lot of things I don't pay attention to. But then this is where he talks about what he does pay attention to. And I think this is a way into his style. Oh, and I should say before we turn it on, when I see photos of Anuk Arudpragasam, I think, oh, he looks kind of cute. But when I see him in video, when he's moving and his eyes are flashing, he is drop dead gorgeous. So see if you agree.
And he looks so young. I mean,
Yeah,
I think he's only 33, isn't he? So, you know, I just think,
yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
Yes, he could be younger. Yeah.
He's very sweet.
Very pretty.
Flirting, not flirting.
Oh, yeah. Am I allowed to talk about him being a gorgeously pretty boy? Because he just is, isn't he?
You are.
It's about this, that something is being attended to, not that a lot of things are being attended to. And I think, you know, if it's possible for that to happen, it's because I take my time, I think, with I guess I take my time writing, but I also I take my time, I take the time of the situation, and I try to expand it out. I guess I don't often think, I don't think of a story, I think of a situation. And a situation involves various, is teaming often, and it involves various contradictory things and various conciliatory things, and they meet each other or miss each other in various ways. And so I take a situation and I think, how can I spread it out? How can I pull its edges out wide enough across a book, really, across two covers, that we can really enter a situation. And I guess that need to slow things down, for me, it comes from I guess the sense that life happens too fast, that every day there are so many things that pass us by, or that strike our eye, that we don't give attention to, or we don't give, I should say, due attention to. We don't give life the time that it actually deserves. And so it's almost, I mean, there is this memorial impulse, I think, that I have when I write, this impulse to memorialize that. I mean, of course, in my writing, there is that's true in a very concrete sense, because I seek to memorialize the Tamil lives that were needlessly destroyed at the end of the Civil War. That's what I've been doing since I've started writing. But also just to memorialize like moments of daily life, moments of ordinary life that often just slip by, I think.
Oh, lovely.
Isn't that lovely?
Yeah, and lovely to hear him say that. There was a moment in the book where he's describing getting on the train to go north, to go to the funeral of Rani, the caregiver who's drowned in the well. And he's describing the start of that train journey and the train filling up and then moving out of the station, and in such detail. And I found myself thinking, it's almost like his description is in real time or even in slow motion. But I was so there, and so that meticulous detail of, like, take time and hear and think of the sounds and the smells and that was one of the things I
love the way you described that in that excerpt, with stretching the edges of the experience, and the experience is teeming with contradictory and conciliatory, and stretching all of that over the length of a book. And that is what he has done. But the writing, the long sentences, I just found it mesmerizing. And it's not a style for everyone. And if Kim were here, I don't know why, she may have gone to sleep by now, because she didn't. She found that a bit soporific. Is that the word?
Yes. Yeah. And it's really interesting, the different words that people use to describe this novel. You know, so the people that don't like it, the words that they use are frustrating, boring, over introspective, meandering, though that's the vocabulary. And then the people that love it, like you or me, the words we'd use would be reflective, meditative, profound.
I might glibly say, if somebody used those words pejoratively, I would just say, you say that like it's a bad thing.
Yes, exactly. Since when is meandering a bad thing in a novel? Tell that to Proust.
Well, and I'm not, Proust went too far, I think, but Anuk has not. At the risk, I don't want to overdo this, but there's a paragraph long excerpt from an interview that he gave to the Paris Review that I'd like to share. He's talking about reading Robert Musil's novel, The Man Without Qualities, at a very young age, and I haven't read the novel, but this is what he says. At the time, I was very moved by the way he places philosophical questioning and response in a kind of living bodily situation. Philosophical problems arise in lived context, in response to real situations. And in philosophy, academically, you don't really ask or answer questions in that way. But I read that book, and it showed me that there was a place in fiction and novels for a lot of what interested me about philosophy. Actually placing these things in their lived context changes philosophy in a way that, charges philosophy in a way that simply discussing them abstractly does not. So I read that book, and I decided that I would like to write fiction, that I wanted to be the kind of person who could write a book like that. So putting that together with what he was talking about in terms of the attention, and I think that's his unique style in a nutshell.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about the other strand of the story. Why don't you start that conversation about the love story?
Love story. And now, one of the things that, in fact, one of the criticisms I've heard of this book is that it's a bit sophomoric. You're not interested in this young man, and his introspective thinking. But I thought, as a depiction of that intense love that you can have at that age, in the end of your teens or your early 20s, when you're all consumed by your lover, and perhaps unspoken contract that you may not both have the same idea of what your relationship is. And that was the kind of relationship this was, where he is besotted with her and she's holding something in reserve all the time because she is very committed politically. And, it's obviously a sexually very successful relationship and one that she enjoys and values, but they want different things. And that's so often the way. We've all been there, haven't we, in a relationship like that?
Definitely. And I remember Kim commenting during our buddy read that it was a kind of a flip of the typical emotional dynamic between a man and a woman, that it was the man that was very needy and kind of desperate and so on. And that was interesting. I cringed because of how much I related to some of his deep insecurities. And I might edit that out of this interview because I don't want people to know how deeply I identified with it. And
I identified with it too, totally. Yes.
And I also cringed momentarily because I thought, why are we spending so much time on this when all these larger themes of trauma and war and recovery and intergenerational everything, all of that stuff is kind of being pushed to the side for pages and pages of this navel-gazy kind of psychological stuff. But I think he knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah. No, I agree. And actually, it gave a bit of a balance to it, and it made Krishan a real person for me, a complex person with, and at the same time that he's doing this navel-gazy, relationship, while he was in that relationship, he was also obsessively watching film of,
footage from the Tamil.
Exactly. So he was carrying both those things in himself at that time, and then we carry them too as readers.
Yes.
Yeah. It's why this book is not simplistic. Yeah. It's not a message book. That's the point. It's not preachy. It's passionate. It's not preachy.
To use Whitman's quote, he contained multitudes.
Yeah. Which, given that it's not that long a book, I came away thinking, my goodness, how many ideas he fits into this book. It may not do a lot in terms of plot action, but in terms of thought action.
Now, one of Kim's main criticisms of the book was that the title is The Passage North, but he doesn't even really get there until the book's almost 2/3 over. Did that bother you?
Not at all. No.
It didn't bother me either. Time is slowed down and time is not linear. I mean, there's jumping all back and forth to past memories and all of that. I didn't.
Yeah. Oh, well, and also I think that assumes that the Passage North only refers to his Passage North, whereas I thought it also referred to Rani's. And because she comes south to live with them and to care for the grandmother, and they hope that that's going to support her recovery from trauma. And then she makes her passage back and never returns. So it was. Yeah, there's dual passage north.
That is something that didn't consciously occur to me that I think is a brilliant observation. So, Kim, take that.
Yes, and Rani is a fascinating character in the book because we barely meet her. I mean, we're only meeting her in retrospect and in people's memories, and yet she's a very sort of complex but understated character.
Rani and the grandmother, both, how he brought them to life there's no dialogue in the book.
No dialogue at all. You noticed that, did you?
Same Paris review, he talked about the fact that all of those conversations would have been in Tamil, and there was just something about putting them into English direct speech. He just said, I couldn't go there. But I didn't even notice it until I was 2/3 of the way through his book. I think Kim mentioned, oh, you're right, there is no dialogue, because I was hearing the conversations. They were being encapsulated. Rani, what a fascinating character.
Yeah, and the grandmother, as you say, such a good character. And you rarely, I particularly appreciate it when you see an elderly character in a book rendered with real, beauty and complexity. Yes, attention. Yeah, exactly. And we get a lot of different sorts of death in this book, don't we? And because there's so much violent death and sudden death and accidental death that may or may not be accidental, and that's a whole interesting thread that we could go back to. And then to have the contrast of his grandmother, sort of that the gradual decline and hanging on to life and hanging on to dignity. Again, there was that balance for me.
And so people that might criticize the book as being he's so stuck in his head and it's all about his thoughts and stuff, I don't agree with that, because he makes these really fascinating women characters that are important in his life and in the story so embodied and fully dimensional on the page, filtered through this consciousness of the protagonist. But
yeah, one thing that I found interesting in the book, which I only kind of really noticed afterwards, I suppose, is, well, one is a male writer writing such good women, which is always lovely to see. But also I was interested about ideas of beauty in the book, and I don't know, but I have the impression that there's the whole caste thing in India and colorism, being seen to be desirable to be paler, lighter skinned. And did you notice how often he talked about dark, lustrous, glowing? But he really sort of turns that on its head, and I presume that was a sort of deliberate choice he was making.
Yes.
Yeah.
Didn't notice it now that I hear you mention it. Yeah, I kind of remember that, but that's a really interesting observation. That reminds me of some of the comments he made in the interview about caste. He's obviously very political and woke about all this, and I think that he said, I've just lost that train of thought.
Or one train of thought that, relating to that, I was really interested in the book when he was referring to a sort of South Asian canon, a literary tradition that is not stuff that I know. But I understand that he now there's also reservations about that, because anything that's in Sanskrit is very closely tied into caste issues.
That is the thought that I lost. That's what he was commenting on, was about the literature and kind of problematizing that people didn't have access to it, that were of a lower caste. And so on.
He did his PhD in philosophy, didn't he? And you can kind of see that in the book, I suppose.
And boy, if you told me that it was a deeply philosophical novel by a writer with a doctorate in philosophy, I wouldn't have come near it. But what that quote about his reaction to the Robert Musil novel and how he explores philosophical ideas in, what was the phrase that was, so living bodily situations, that's what the connection that I don't get from actual philosophy, that I thought worked just magically here.
I mean, I think there would be a risk that he could have sort of, disappeared up his own fundament, as it were, if it was too philosophical. And it didn't for me, because it was so rooted in the aftermath of war. How do you come to terms with that? It is through psychology and philosophy. You need, that's where those things become of practical value, isn't it? When you're trying to deal with the inconscionable.
And that the protagonist is trying to find, because he wasn't there, he didn't witness these things, but he becomes, as we've already alluded to, he becomes obsessed with watching the footage of it. And in fact, it's a significant moment between him and Andrew that he's remembering, where he watches the documentary that was really important to him. And it's described, I feel like I've seen the documentary. I didn't take the time. I actually forgot. Someday I will sit down and see if I can Google my way to that documentary. But I feel like I've seen it, because he described it so vividly. And the things that are in this book about image, both film and photograph, and how he's feeling kind of like an outsider. He wasn't there. He wasn't a witness, but he's trying to experience it or understand it by subjecting himself, let's put it that way, subjecting himself to the visual record, and all the philosophical undercurrents of that are just absolutely fascinating in this novel. So
I did find myself wondering if that was something that Anuk himself had done, and that he's, we can only speculate, but the documentary that you're talking about brought one of the rare moments in this novel when I laughed, because it's not a funny book, as it were, and shouldn't be, but in fact I'll actually quote it to you. So it talks about the film, and though it had been made by a filmmaker from Denmark or Norway, or one of those other northern European countries that were hard to distinguish.
Yes. Yeah, that was brilliant. I love that. I sometimes thought that there was a humor in the story of the grandmother and her various momentary or temporary selfishnesses and so on, that he wasn't trying to get a guffaw out of me, but he was describing things that we couldn't help but at least smile at.
Yes.
There's so many
moments to smile, but that was my only moment to laugh, I think.
So many layers and levels to this book, and we've barely scratched the surface, but I think that's enough to give people a tease that they should check it out. I would be quite delighted if this won.
Oh, me too. Yeah, absolutely. But then I don't feel I've read enough of the others to compare. But it would be
the one that I think is Booker worthy so far is the South African one, The Promise by Damon Galgut.
Mm-hmm.
But I would be delighted if either one of them won, and I'm still making my way through the shortlist, so there might be others that I think will deem worthy in the future. But whether you're into the Booker or not, if at least 30% of what we've talked about has kind of intrigued you, you should give A Passage North a try. Ros, this is a delight as always. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Shawn. It's been a joy.
Well, and now I'll thank you for having me on your channel. There. We got the parody.